If you searched for the richest country in the world, you probably expected one clean answer. But economics has a trick for you. There isn't just one kind of rich. A country can be rich in total size, rich per person, rich in purchasing power, or rich in household income. Those are not the same thing. So before we name any winner, we need to ask the real question: richest by what measure? For most comparisons, the most common benchmark is GDP per capita. That means a country's total economic output divided by its population. In simple terms, it's an average of how much value is produced per person. It is not the same as salary, and it is not the same as how wealthy the median resident feels. But it is the standard many economists use when they talk about the richest country. And once you use that lens, the answer gets interesting fast. At the top of many IMF-based 2026 comparisons, three names keep appearing: Singapore, Luxembourg, and Qatar. On GDP per capita adjusted for purchasing power parity, or PPP, Singapore comes in around $173,700 per person. Luxembourg follows at about $156,700. Qatar is close behind at roughly $126,100. For context, the world average in the same type of table is around $23,000. That gap is huge. So how can countries that are relatively small outrank much larger economies? Because GDP per capita is a per-person measure. A smaller population can make the number look extraordinary if the economy produces a lot of value for each resident. That is why the title of richest often goes to compact, high-income nations rather than the biggest countries on Earth. Take Luxembourg first. On paper, it often looks like a cheat code. It has a very small population, a powerful financial sector, and a workforce that extends beyond its borders. Every day, thousands of people commute into Luxembourg from neighboring countries to work there. They help generate GDP, but they are not counted in the resident population denominator in the same way. That can push GDP per capita very high. But Luxembourg also shows why a single number never tells the full story. A country can sit near the top of the rankings and still face real economic challenges. The OECD has pointed out that Luxembourg has experienced weak productivity growth over long stretches. So yes, the headline is impressive, but it does not mean every part of the economy is moving perfectly. Now look at Qatar. Qatar's wealth ranking is heavily tied to energy. When oil and gas prices rise, its national income can surge. When commodity prices cool or production changes, the ranking can slide. That makes Qatar especially sensitive to global market cycles. In other words, its place near the top is real, but it is also more volatile than many people realize. And that volatility matters because it reveals something important about wealth rankings. They are not fixed trophies. They move with the price of energy, with output, and with population changes. In a small country, those shifts can change the math quickly. Then there is Singapore. Singapore often ranks among the vocation and policy into unusually high output per person. That is why Singapore so often sits at or near the top of PPP-based rankings. But again, there is a catch. GDP per capita is an average. It tells you what the economy produces per person, not what the typical household earns, and not how affordable housing, food, or transport may feel from day to day. A country can rank incredibly high and still have pressures that residents experience very differently. So if Singapore leads one list, Luxembourg leads another, and Qatar leads yet another, who is actually the richest? The honest answer is all of them, depending on the definition. And that is where the confusion comes from. When people say richest country, they might mean total GDP, which would favor huge economies like the United States or China. They might mean GDP per capita, which favors smaller, high-output economies. They might mean GDP per capita at PPP, which adjusts for local price levels and often gives a better sense of purchasing power. Or they might mean wealth per adult, which measures assets, not annual production. Those rankings can all produce different winners. Even the source and timing matter. If you are looking at IMF World Economic Outlook data, remember that it is updated on a schedule, usually twice a year. That means a ranking can change simply because a newer database replaced an older one. And even the newest release is not the final word. It often contains estimates and projections based on the information available at the time. Later, when new data comes in, the numbers can be revised again. That is why a country can be number 1 in one article and number 3 in another, even if both are technically correct. There are also a few reasons the rankings shift so much from year to year. First, exchange rates matter, especially for nominal GDP per capita measured in US dollars. A currency move can change the ranking even if the real economy barely changes. Second, commodity prices matter. That is a big reason oil and gas exporters like Qatar can rise or fall quickly. Third, population changes matter. In a small country, a wave of migration, a change in labor force size, or a shift in the number of commuters can move the per-person number noticeably. And fourth, revisions matter. Statistical agencies update data. International organizations revise estimates. Economists refine the picture. So the leaderboard is always being redrawn. That is the real lesson behind the question. The phrase richest country in the world sounds precise, but it is really a shortcut. It only becomes meaningful when you define the metric, the year, and the source. Once you do that, the answer becomes clearer, but also more honest. If you mean highest GDP per capita, countries like Singapore, Luxembourg, and Qatar are among the strongest contenders. If you mean total economic size, the answer changes completely. If you mean purchasing power, living standards, or median household experience, the list can change again. So the next time someone asks which country is the richest, the best response is not just a name. It is a question back. Ask, by what metric, which year, and from which source? That is how you turn a vague headline into a real economic comparison.